Hi, welcome to another episode of Artcast. My guest today is Maureen O'Keefe. She's an artist from our area, and I'm really delighted to have you.
I'm happy to be here.
So I'm going to start the way I start with everybody.
Okay.
How did you get interested in art?
Oh, a long time ago.
Can't be that long, I'm sure.
We'll go with that. No, I think I've always been interested in art. My mom was huge in terms of like doing crafts with us when we were little. I mean, ever since I can remember. But the first time that I realized that other people were looking at what I was doing in a special way was in second grade. I kid you not. I was being a bad student, and I was supposed to be having like my little reading time. I don't know, there was some kind of program, maybe it was the Book It program. But we're supposed to be reading, and I have this cool poster next to me on the wall, and this is Vanessa's second grade class, and I started copying it. So I did a little copy of this poster, and she comes around, and I remember her just lightly tapping on my desk, and she says, "That's really phenomenal, but you are supposed to be reading."
You can always tell the art kids by their papers.
Yes, exactly. So I got in trouble and got the compliment at the same time.
Oh,
And realized like, oh, this is a talent that I have.
that was pretty neat.
So
Now, you then decided through high school that this was what you were going to pursue.
not at all.
Really?
I always was taking art classes. I remember in, I don't know, probably 6th or 7th grade, my parents had a friend, Tim Seawer. He was a local guy they knew from high school, and he had gone to art school, I think at the Dayton Art Institute. Anyway, they hired him to give me some drawing lessons in 5th or 6th grade, and then I took art classes in high school and went to college for English teaching, to be an English teacher.
No,
Yes.
I did not know that about you.
And I just kind of got lost in college. I dropped out of my first year, which was at Kent State, came back here, worked in a factory, worked at a daycare, worked at the women's shelter. I was, really scrambling around trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but art was kind of always this background.
Gotcha.
And then I think Head Start, I was working at Head Start, and they sent me to Edison for early childhood. And I took an art class for fun, and Ann Vaccaro, who was the
I know Ann.
head
Yep.
of the Edison art department, she was like, "You have got something." And she really kind of pushed me into pursuing art a little bit more seriously, and then I ended up going to the Savannah College of Art and Design. Because I just, I was working all those weird jobs and thought,
It just didn't fit, right?
yeah, nothing fit. But art just
fit.
kept following me, yeah.
How
And-
is Savannah? I hear that's wonderful.
Oh my gosh. It's probably on a weekly basis that my husband Dylan and I, who we met in Savannah, talk about moving back.
Oh, I hope not, but I understand that.
We probably won't, but it's so gorgeous. We were there for 7 years, and really the best time. It's such a beautiful city. It's full of creative people, which just makes it special. It's a very special place.
I think that's, so how did you get back here?
When we got married in Savannah. He's from Texas and Arkansas. We met in Savannah, got married. We bought our first house and had our daughter Scarlett. And when we had her, she was about a year old, and we started looking around at schools and stuff, and I was really missing my family. They're all here. And it was like, okay, we're gonna either move to where Dylan's family is or where mine is.
Gotcha.
His family was in Hawaii at that time.
Wait a minute. Let me make that, that was tough.
Yeah, so the decision was to come here just because it was gonna be a infinitely easier move.
Well, that, I do understand that, yeah.
And my family is huge, so I have 5 brothers.
I still
so
find
it's
that
fun.
amazing. 1 girl and 5 brothers.
1 girl, 5 boys, yep.
That's amazing. So how, since you've been here,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that we don't have art here, because we do.
Mm-hmm.
We have, but it's not Savannah. How has it been here doing your studio, trying to get your artwork out?
I have found a way to make it work. Honestly, Gateway was kind of my segue back into my practice.
Really?
Yes, because I moved back up here. I had Scarlett and got a job at the bank, and I really wasn't making much art. But I got into doing these photorealistic drawings, and I entered one in the Spring Fling. And I won, I think, first place in drawing.
That's because it was phenomenal, by the way.
Thank you very much. I was very proud of those pieces, and I did lots of those little, not little, some of them are big, but photorealistic portraits and body parts and things. And it just sort of springboarded me back into actually making work. And I've done all sorts of things since then.
That's true.
But yeah, so Gateway kind of got me back into it, and then there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity here in town for showing work, so I branched out to Dayton. I joined the Dayton, or it was called DVAC at the time, Dayton Visual Arts Center, now it's called the CO. So I joined that organization, and from there I got a fellowship with them 1 year and met some people. I applied for the
Ohio Arts
Council Individual Excellence Award Program, and I received that in 2019, so that allowed me to get the studio.
Which that to me is phenomenal. I mean, as a community, we are so proud that you're here and that you received that and that we have a studio.
I'm so thankful for it because it allowed me to stay in my hometown, raise my kids where I wanted to raise my kids with my family. Now we've got Dylan's family here too. Have the studio, feel like I have this really thriving practice in a place that isn't New York City.
Which,
it's not even Dayton.
I think sometimes people have a perception that if you live somewhere that's not associated with art, that you either can't do it, you aren't a real artist, and their preconceptions are not true.
No, there are so many ways, and you really just have to make your own way, which is what I'm trying to do. I'm not going to say I've been totally successful at it, but I'm working towards it. I would like to have more of a direct art community.
Right, yes.
But that's also why I'm here. I mean,
because I think, and it's the sad part about this year is we haven't been able to have some of our exhibits. But when we have some of the larger ones and all the artists come together, it's some of my most favorite times because of the interaction between the artists.
Yeah.
Because of what that generates in terms of creativity and ideas. Well, did you try this? Ooh, I like how you've expanded on this one. You've never tried this media before. What made you decide to try that?
Yeah, having that community is so important, and that kind of just leads me into teaching too. I teach at Edison, drawing and painting, and it's the same effect when I'm in the classroom and I'm talking to students and we're delving into the process or the concept behind artworks or whatever. It's inspiring to me. Being around other artists, even as students, whatever, it's people communicating with each other.
It's like food for the soul.
Yeah, it really is building.
I think an artist, you need that. You need that, and I know people have this picture of somebody sitting alone and painting forever on this masterpiece.
Which is a huge part of it.
Which is a huge part of it. But on the other hand, it's that interaction with other people that leads to different themes, and it leads to inspiration, and it leads to things you never thought possible.
Oh, 100%. I've learned that this year specifically because I'm kind of a loner. I enjoy being in the classroom, and I am confident in public that way, but I'm very much an introvert. Love my studio time. So I didn't think that the pandemic and the isolation would affect me the way that it has, but I'm not totally in an artist block. Right. But there's certainly not as much going on up here. as there has been at other times.
I know, I understand that. I think
Yeah.
I've heard that not just from visual artists, but I've heard that across the board. There's an element that an artist gets from just being around people.
Yeah, you need stimulus. You need an exchange of ideas. And I
Right.
think that's why, like, you see Paris in the 1800s, and
Right.
you have this explosion of not only creativity, but philosophy and writing and poetry and all
Yes.
this coming out because the people are there and they're in cafes and they're hanging out. And
Which kind of leads me to my next question with you. I mean, I think about those Paris. I think about all those artist enclaves through history.
mhm,
And you're right, they were associated with social movements or
mhm,
something, Renaissance maybe.
right.
So I'm thinking, what is it that your work in particular, and I've seen an evolution in your work, from your photorealism to a much more message-driven artwork.
Mhm.
And is there a specific message you're trying to get out? Is it just that today I'm inspired by this?
I think overall, I'm a portrait artist, so there's that sort of theme. I like to think about identities and what makes a person who they are, how they fit into their community. And so whether it's just a very straightforward portrait of what someone looks like, or whether it's one of these more message-driven or political pieces, all of that still deals with the identity of the sitter or the identity of the allegory I'm trying to present.
Right.
It's really about people interacting with who they are.
I like that. It's like it's trying to take what's happening on the inside of someone and paint it on the outside.
Yeah,
Which
which is a really basic, concept of what a portrait should be. But when I'm thinking about the work, especially like you said, how it evolved into this, more conceptual or message-driven work, the message is still
message hasn't changed, just the work has changed.
right. And the message, it might be more specific, I guess. So like each individual portrait might have some specific ideas about identity. One might be dealing with feminist issues, one
Right.
might be dealing with political issues, but it's still about the person and how they're interacting with those topics.
I think that's wonderful. I mean, I know here we would like to do a little more socially conscious art a couple times in the exhibit. Last year we did the women's
loved
women's
that.
rights.
That's great.
I loved it. I loved the message that those combined, all the artwork combined had a huge message.
Mm-hmm.
We found that when we did it with Bad Art, we had the veterans.
Mm-hmm.
The combined message was just overwhelming.
Right.
And I'd like to do a little bit more of that. And that always, I'm going to segue a little bit. I'm going to try to make what we just talked about. This next question for me is kind of a deep one.
Mm-hmm.
But what do we even consider art?
Oh gosh. My definition is very broad. But I think of art as primarily a communication.
Yes.
So you have communication is not exclusively human, but our capacity kind of for abstract thought is. And so to me, anything that is communicating an abstract thought or can be considered art. So I think about the cave paintings. Those are the very
Right.
first art that humans have found that other humans created. And we don't know exactly what those things meant, but we can assume because we have some shared experience of those animals that are painted on the wall or those
Right.
handprints that are blow painted. Like the handprint is the signature. I was here.
Right.
I existed at this time and in this place, and that's the communication.
Which, when you just think of the simplicity of that,
Mm-hmm.
is an enormous statement.
Exactly.
I existed.
Exactly, and that's the abstract thought that that I was talking about. But we are communicating through time, and
Time travel.
yeah. So
I mean,
in that sense,
I know that seems corny, but in some respects, you're right. If that little handprint,
mm-hmm.
is a message through a lot of ages that I existed, I was here.
Mm-hmm.
In art,
Mm-hmm.
survived.
Exactly. Longer than writing. I mean, we've been communicating
That's
with
correct.
pictures much longer than we've been communicating with writing. And so, to bring it back to the definition of art, that's also why music is considered art, why writing is considered art.
Yeah, I see
It's
that.
that communication, that element of telling our own story or allowing another human being to understand something about ourselves that comes out of us.
Do you, when you teach your students,
Mm-hmm.
do you tell them that this is your opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to reach in and give a message?
Yes, definitely. And it doesn't have to be some big political message or,
Right.
you know, it doesn't have to be something deep and profound. It can be, I love the way this flower looks and I want you to see this flower also.
The joy that I receive
Exactly.
from seeing a flower.
Exactly. But it can also be something very complex and meaningful and, you know, it can challenge your conception of reality if you want to go that far,
I
you know?
do. I mean, but that's all good.
Exactly.
I mean, you think about periods in history, and I'm going to say this. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I think art has preceded big change.
Yes. Well, or reflected it, but yeah.
You know, it's one of the ways you know there's change either happened or happening
Mm-hmm.
is by looking at the art.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what they were free to express versus what they weren't free to express. You know, how it was the figure rigid or is the figure a little more open and free. I mean, things, just little things that have an awful lot to say.
Yes, well, that makes me think of ancient Egyptian art. So you had the majority of the ancient Egyptian period, you have these extremely sort of prescribed ways of depicting the human form.
Right.
And then you have this one weird period where the one pharaoh decided he's going to go with monotheism. He's going to
Right.
do away with all these other gods and we're only going to have one. But the artwork became so much more human, more naturalistic.
That's really interesting.
When you look at the hieroglyphs or the images of he and his wife, they become more rounded, more human. They're depicted in poses that are not just that
the stiff,
the stiff pose. They have their children on their laps, and it's very interesting. You know that
is really interesting to me because that is in direct opposition of what you would think. I mean, when you think of an Egyptian pharaoh from that time period, you don't think of a dad with kids on his lap.
exactly.
You think of, and art, to be quite frank,
Mm-hmm.
movies in particular have painted that image that we hold.
Mm-hmm.
So to have one that's outside of that prescribed, oh, you will think of a pharaoh like this.
Right.
You will, you know, they are always like this. Well, okay, in my experience, there's nothing ever always anything.
Right. There's a lot of gray in the world. A lot of gray areas.
A lot of gray. There's, you know, and I think maybe part of art's job is to capture the gray areas.
Amen. Yes, that's my whole philosophy.
I mean, because, you know, it's real easy to stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, just the other day, I'm taking classes. Now, you can't tell on the podcast, but I am a grandmother. And when I went in, and this is no reflection on anybody in this, it just is how it was. I went in to get my taxes done, and I said, by the way, I put X amount of dollars in toward my education, because I want to finish my degree. And the first thing she said to me, looking at me and saying,
Oh no.
is this your first degree? And I said, well, yes. I quit and I had kids and I'm coming back.
Right.
And I think there were 10 questions all trying to get around the fact that you don't look like you should be in college.
Right.
And that's a long story to say that I think art needs to capture and break those stereotypes, because you're right, I don't look like a 20-year-old.
But good for you for going back and getting your degree.
Right, and it breaks, we have to stop thinking so stereotypically.
Yes.
And art is always at the forefront
I agree.
of breaking those stereotypes, of getting you without actually confronting you.
Mm-hmm.
I like that about art. It's not in your face yelling at you. It's there for you to consider.
Right.
It's there for you to take in. And it's very private. you can say, wait a minute, I never thought of it like that.
Yeah, you can digest it on your own time, and sometimes you don't see everything in it the first time. Or you
Right.
go home and you think about it later, and the light bulb goes off.
Right,
You know?
right.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it for me that's just fascinating. And that's why, I'm not an artist, but I think that's why I love art.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much in it. There's the emotion, there's the history, there's what is the artist trying to say? Is the artist trying to capture something, that didn't exist before?
Right.
Or
Well, and that all boils down to communication.
it does all boil down to communication. And you're right, art is the earliest form of communication.
And to me, the most interesting thing in that vein about it is that with any form of communication, what you read may be different from what I read. And
Yes.
that's why it always lives in that gray area. If I put
I like
out
that.
a piece of artwork that is in your face, like you were saying, I look at it and I walk away.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't require anything of me if it's just like a stop sign. Oh, I'm supposed to stop.
Right.
Okay.
I stop.
And then there's no more engagement with it. So
Correct.
if you are communicating effectively, I feel in art anyways, I guess, communicating effectively, if you need someone to stop, a stop sign's pretty effective. But in art, if you're trying to show that gray area, the way to do that is by kind of giving those little bits and pieces.
And letting people connect dots.
Exactly.
We had one of my favorite exhibits here. People either loved it or they hated it, but they never went out without having stopped and looked at all the paintings.
Mm-hmm.
They always, if they came with someone, they always conversed about what that painting meant, versus just walking through and saying that was pretty.
Right.
Which to me was the essence of just a superior show.
Yes.
Because they came out talking about something.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't necessarily, super political. It wasn't anything like that. Some of it was just little tiny messages, little
Right.
things that they're absorbing. And everybody gets something different, which I love about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why I love art. Because the other thing is that it's personal.
Yes.
It's very personal.
Well, I always tell my students, you're going to make a very personal work of art, or you're going to intend this communication from your work. Then you're going to put it out into the world,
Right.
and it's your baby, but it's going to become what it wants to become. It's going to grow up to be what it is, and that depends on all of your viewers. They have their own input into that, and then it becomes
As
theirs.
an artist, that has to be difficult.
Yes, it is very difficult. Well, and I think it's one of those things that makes all of us very self-conscious about putting work out. And some people are able to overcome that self-consciousness and show work, and then other people just keep their work for themselves, like a journal, and you don't ever put it out there because it's always a risk.
Well, that is true. Artists have to put themselves, to be a good artist,
Mm-hmm.
in any of the arts, you put yourself out.
Exactly. It's exposure.
It's exposure, you get all the technique. You do your best to be the best performer, the best artist,
Mm-hmm.
the best anything. Then there's that moment where I guess the way we put it today is you go live.
Yeah, exactly.
There you are, and what your message is now out. Now whether someone takes it and runs with what you thought, whether they, and especially over the centuries, some of that's been lost.
Right. Because the context, I guess the historical context that a work is made within has dictated the making of the work, but it doesn't dictate the viewing of the work because the history of art is so long.
Right, civilization and art.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it was simultaneous, but pretty dang close.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the way to communicate.
Right.
And you think about art being an equalizer in communication.
Well, really, that just popped into my head, the little Jesus fish.
Right.
That's a recognizable symbol that was a secret symbol in the past. Now everyone knows what it is, but it was specifically a coded message that illiterate people could understand and feel community because of.
Right.
And it served so many purposes, and it serves a slightly different purpose now.
Yes, I mean, that is true.
But it's the same image.
But it's the same, well, think about people, I mean, I guess what I was thinking about is that people, when you communicate, you could be different ethnicities, you could be from different countries, you could be, not even speak the same language.
Right.
And yet there is an image that can speak to all of that.
Yes.
It touches something way beyond, something universal in all of us.
Yes.
And that to me, there's, I don't want to use the word power, because that's not exactly the word, but it's such a unifier. It can be used in such a unifying way.
Yes. It's maybe not power, but it's empowering.
That maybe that's the way to put it.
Yeah, I am fascinated by art in general, and those are all the reasons. It's so, I feel like it's something that's so deep in humanity, and I, outside of art, am interested in archaeology and history and science and all the things, and that's just kind of the one genre or whatever for me that puts all that together and allows me to see all of it at the same time. All those things that are interesting about humanity. I don't know.
I think in many ways, every artist I've talked to, whether they're a musical artist or a visual artist, all comes down to what you just said.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the common denominator. The other thing I know about artists is that there is something inside. And if they, for some reason, couldn't play music, they'll find a way visually for it to come out.
Right.
If you're, for some reason, could no longer do your visual art, you'll find other ways for that, what's that little seed that's inside of you to come out.
Yeah.
And I also think most people don't realize everybody has it inside.
Yes, that's another thing that I enjoy about teaching, is that you'll have people come in who want to take the art class. They're either there because they are going for graphic design, or they are just taking it for an elective. But they come in and they'll say, well, I can't do this. It's like, no, you can do that. You can do that. You just need me to show you a couple tricks. But
it's this, we don't look at art in terms of the fact that there's a science to the art. That there are a set of skills that you can establish.
Exactly. Now there are things beyond that to make art that is
meaningful,
good in the sense that I think most people would look and say, oh, that's good art. It looks like what it's supposed to look like, or it's conceptually meaty in some way, like abstract expressionism or something. So there are academically good pieces of artwork, but in my mind, communication is the basis of everything. And so if you're communicating something, it's good. All you need to do is make a mark on the page. And
that is true.
You have made art. We start in my class with mark making, which can be a lip print on your piece of paper. You can dent it with a hammer. Any mark on your page is the history of something that happened to that page.
Right.
And that is the communication. So that's all you need. And that gives people the permission to make bad art, before they make good art or learn the tricks to make what is considered quote unquote good. All they need is permission to make that first mark, and let that be the communication.
I mean, that to me is really rather freeing.
Yeah, exactly.
Just make a mark. And that's figurative as well as literal.
Right, correct.
Just make the mark. I mean, what a free statement.
And I make them stand up. They laugh at me. Every class, every semester, they laugh at me because I make them get up, and I'll do a dance, and I'm waving my arms around, and I'm like, you need to hold your charcoal in your hand in front of your easel and just flop your arm around.
I think I could handle that.
Yeah, and they're like, is this a college course?
Oh, great, let me we sign up for?
Right. But they end up getting into it, and we have a lot of fun, and then, we go from there,
But see, for me, that's just so wonderful. And I want to thank you. I mean, this has been, we could go on for hours.
I know, we really could.
We might have to have episode 2 of this.
We can talk about what is art.
We can talk about what is art.
Okay.
We'll definitely do that. And I want to thank you. This has been such a joy. And thank you for listening. We'll be back again.